At 4:30 a.m., engines went silent along the Polish border. Beslady, Bagrationowsk, Grzechotki, Mamonowo 2. 4 crossings, 1 choke point. On screens and scanners, green lights flickered, cameras blinked, sensors hummed, but wheels did not turn. By sunrise, more than 18,000 truck drivers were stranded in Russia's westernmost enclave. Cargo clocks froze, insurance lines were cut, factories halted shifts. A region built on movement stopped breathing. Kaliningrad once sold itself as Moscow's showroom to Europe. In January 2026, it looked like a waiting room. Buses still ran to Gdansk. Open, officials said. Crossing time stretched from 2 hours to 5. For logistics, the word open meant paralysis. For families, it meant empty shelves. For businesses, it meant layoffs by the thousands. Then came the warning. On December 11th, a Polish general spoke on camera. A 300-kilometer threat radius. Harsh language. Zero ambiguity. Warsaw's eastern shield hardened into steel and software. Mines were laid. Controls tightened. Insurers walked away. Within weeks, the logistics sector collapsed. The number was blunt. 18,000 jobs gone. Overnight. To the north, Lithuania tightened transit. The Kybartai-Chernyshevsko line slowed to a crawl. Pedestrians only at Panemunai-Sovetsk. Rail still moved, barely, and only for non-sanctioned goods. Steel offloaded, coal denied, construction stalled, industry shuttered, gas flowed. For now, a 2026 to 2031 transit deal promised 10.5 million cubic meters per day, but another clock was ticking. Track gauges. Early 2026 decisions. European standards versus Soviet steel. If rails changed, trains would not reach Kaliningrad. If trucks stopped and rails failed, the unthinkable would follow. Prices surged. Inflation hit 10.2%. Transport costs jumped 15 to 20%. Milk, flour, electronics, every item carried an enclave tax. And then the unthinkable happened. Kaliningrad is not just another Russian region. It is a 15,100 square kilometer enclave wedged between Poland and Lithuania, separated from mainland Russia by more than 300 miles of NATO territory. About 1 million people live there. It hosts Russia's Baltic Fleet. It sits closer to Berlin than to Moscow. For years, the Kremlin framed it as a forward outpost, a strategic spear pointed at Europe. In 2025, that narrative began to collapse under geography, sanctions, and power politics. The confrontation is not Kaliningrad versus Poland alone. It is Russia versus a hardened eastern flank of the NATO, backed by the regulatory weight of the European Union. Poland's 232-kilometer border with Russia is the pressure point. Warsaw never fully closed it. Instead, it turned it into a technological wall. Cameras, motion sensors, automated checks. The goal was not spectacle. The goal was friction. Lithuania controls the other artery. Rail and road transit across its territory keeps Kaliningrad alive. Without it, the enclave relies on sea lanes across the Baltic. That route is longer, costlier, and strategically exposed. Since 2022, the EU's sanctions regime has tightened year by year. By 2025, the rules were unforgiving. Only non-sanctioned goods could move by rail. Metals, coal, and construction materials were stripped from trains. The impact rippled across factories within weeks. This matters because Kaliningrad's economy was built on cheap transit. Components arrived from Europe. Goods moved quickly to Russian markets. That efficiency masked structural weakness. Small distances, fast crossings, low insurance premiums. When those advantages vanished, costs exploded. Logistics firms faced uninsured routes. Banks froze credit. Employers cut staff. The contrasts are stark. Cheap drones dominate modern battlefields, yet Kaliningrad's crisis is driven by mundane systems. Rails, trucks, permits, gauges. Small checkpoints now outweigh massive warships. A few kilometers of track matter more than billion-dollar platforms. The region's industrial pride, auto assembly, furniture, food processing, relied on just-in-time delivery. Sanctions shattered that rhythm. History deepens the tension. Kaliningrad was Königsberg before 1945. It became Soviet by force, then Russian by inheritance. Its identity was always political. In 2025, politics returned with force. Poland's eastern shield, Lithuania's transit leverage, Baltic states preparing to exit the Brel power ring. Each move followed legal frameworks. Each tightened the noose. The question is no longer symbolic. It is operational. Can an enclave survive when borders harden, rails change, and energy grids decouple? Or is Kaliningrad entering a phase where geography becomes destiny again? The escalation did not arrive as a single blow, it came in waves, each one heavier than the last. First, insurers pulled coverage. By mid-December, major underwriters quietly removed Kaliningrad routes from their books. Without insurance, trucks could not move. By January, logistics companies began shutting depots. Parking lots filled with idle rigs, engines cold, drivers waiting for calls that never came. At the borders, the scenes turned surreal. Cameras tracked every axle, sensors flagged minor anomalies. A single customs check could halt a convoy for hours. 2 hours became 5. 5 became a full day. Food trucks waited beside electronics, perishables spoiled. Contracts were breached, penalties piled up. Within weeks, managers issued termination notices. The numbers spread fast, 18,000 drivers sidelined. Then came the second twist. Rail was supposed to save the system. Trains still crossed Lithuania under EU agreements, but the rules were surgical, non-sanctioned goods only. Each wagon inspected, steel removed, coal denied, construction materials offloaded. Factories dependent on those inputs slowed, then stopped. At Avtotor, once assembling BMW and Kia models, production lines paused again. Parts did not arrive. Shifts were canceled. Workers sent home on unpaid leave. A third shock followed. Sea transport. Moscow pushed ferries across the Baltic. In 2023, volumes reached 2.29 million tons. On paper, it looked viable. In practice, capacity was limited. Costs were steep. By 2026, the federal budget allocated 5 billion rubles to subsidize maritime routes. The money stabilized companies, not prices. Shelves still reflected higher transport costs. Then the human impact surfaced. In the third quarter of 2025, Kaliningrad's workforce shrank by 23,000 people, a 4.1% drop. Unemployment surged to 21.7%. Official registries showed fewer numbers, but reality cut deeper. Over 70% of job losses hit women over 40. Office staff, accountants, administrators, stable careers vanished. Average job searches stretched to 7 months. Another twist deepened the spiral. Migrant labor reversed course. Central Asian workers, long sustaining construction and services, began leaving. Local data showed returns accelerating through 2025. Their message was blunt: no work left. When even low-wage labor exits, an economy stalls. And then came the images. A covert video from a Kaliningrad airport. A motorized infantry commander described a conveyor belt. Personnel processed for deployment. Standards erased. Fitness declared universal. Barracks locked to prevent exits. The footage spread quietly. Fear traveled faster than freight. Each layer compounded the next. Logistics failure fed industrial shutdowns. Shutdowns drove unemployment. Unemployment fueled migration. Migration hollowed the tax base. And beneath it all, a deeper escalation loomed. Energy, rails, power grids. The slow buildup was complete. The next phase would not be gradual. It would be systemic. The strategic impact of Kaliningrad's crisis now cuts across 3 pillars: economy, society, and military posture. Each reinforces the other. Together, they reshape Russia's western flank. Economically, the numbers are unforgiving. Logistics costs rose 15 to 20% within a year. Regional inflation reached 10.2% by December, above the national average. Food prices climbed faster. Retail margins thinned. According to reporting cited by Reuters, transport disruptions in sanctioned regions translate directly into consumer inflation within weeks. Kaliningrad followed that pattern exactly. Every detour, every transfer, every delayed crossing added rubles to the final price. Industry absorbed the first shock. Auto assembly stalled. Furniture plants lost access to materials and markets. Food processors halted lines due to shortages of metal cans and packaging. Business surveys painted a bleak picture. 1/3 of firms planned closures. 73% planned price hikes. 1 in 4 employers prepared layoffs. By late 2025, the workforce contraction signaled more than a downturn. It showed structural damage. Socially, the strain is visible. Outmigration accelerated. Between 2022 and 2025, estimates suggest 100,000 to 150,000 residents left the region. The pattern matters. About 80% moved east to mainland Russia. Moscow, St. Petersburg, Krasnodar, not Europe. Borders blocked that path. Kaliningrad lost its most mobile workers and its future tax base. Analysts quoted by Deutsche Welle note that on enclaves under pressure tend to hollow out quietly. No panic, just steady erosion. Militarily, the picture is more complex. Kaliningrad still hosts advanced systems, missiles, radar, naval assets. On paper, it remains a stronghold, but sustainment is the hidden variable. Troops require supplies, maintenance requires parts, bases require stable power. The logistics collapse undermines readiness over time. Defense analysts cited by Defense News warn that isolated garrisons face rising costs and declining resilience, even without direct conflict. Energy adds another layer. Kaliningrad faces isolation from the Brel electricity ring as Baltic states synchronize with continental Europe. Moscow invested heavily in gas-fired plants and the Marshal Vasilevsky LNG vessel. The goal was island mode, independence. Yet experts cited by Janes highlight three risks: frequency instability, cost inflation, and maritime vulnerability. Pipeline gas is cheap, LNG by sea is not. Any disruption hits industry first. The economic losses compound military stress: reduced GDP, shrinking labor pools, rising subsidies. Moscow can compensate for a time, but subsidies do not create growth. They delay consequences. As BBC analysis has noted, prolonged isolation transforms strategic assets into fiscal burdens. Kaliningrad is entering that phase. The region no longer projects strength outward, it absorbs pressure inward. And the longer the isolation persists, the harder recovery becomes. The question now is not whether the impact is real, it is whether the system can adapt before the next escalation lands. Kaliningrad's crisis no longer belongs to Kaliningrad alone. It has become a test case for a changing global order, where borders harden, energy grids split, and logistics become weapons. Every major power is watching. Some are adjusting, others are learning. For NATO, the Enclave is a pressure valve. Poland's eastern shield and Lithuania's transit controls reflect a broader doctrine shift. Control movement, control tempo. Cheap measures now neutralize expensive assets. Mines, sensors, custom software, and legal frameworks impose friction on a region hosting billion-dollar platforms. It is asymmetry without missiles. A few thousand euros in technology force millions in countermeasures. The European Union sees Kaliningrad as proof that sanctions work slowly, not instantly. Brussels did not cut power. It did not close borders overnight. It narrowed options, rail rules, insurance regimes, customs checks. Over time, the cost curve bent against the Enclave. Analysts cited by Reuters describe this as cumulative pressure, designed to avoid escalation while reshaping behavior. The United States plays a quieter role. With Donald Trump back in the White House, Washington emphasizes burden sharing and deterrence through allies. Kaliningrad fits that model. US forces do not need to move. Polish and Baltic measures achieve results. The message is indirect but clear. Geography favors those who control choke points. China views the situation differently. Beijing studies Kaliningrad as a warning. Enclaves depend on stability. Supply chains break under political stress. Chinese analysts cited in regional security reviews note parallels with other isolated territories. The lesson is not military, it is economic resilience. Redundant routes matter. Energy independence matters. Control of standards matters. The Middle East watches energy dynamics closely. LNG dependence, maritime choke points, naval exposure. Kaliningrad's reliance on seaborne gas mirrors vulnerabilities seen elsewhere. Experts quoted by BBC compare the Baltic's transformation into a NATO lake with contested waterways in other regions. Control seas, control energy, control outcomes. Weapon comparisons sharpen the contrast. Cheap drones dominate headlines, yet Kaliningrad shows that trucks, rails, and grids decide endurance. A $1 million drone draws attention. A delayed rail gauge change redraws strategy. This is modern conflict below the threshold. Defense analysts cited by Janes stress that none of these scenarios require open conflict. Pressure alone reshapes outcomes. Kaliningrad's fate will signal how future standoffs play out, through tanks or through timetables. The world is learning a hard lesson here. Control movement, control energy, control standards, and even the strongest fortress can feel very small. Kaliningrad's story now reads like a warning written in slow motion. No single explosion, no formal blockade, just pressure applied from every direction. Borders hardened, rails questioned, energy grids split, insurance withdrawn. Each move followed a rulebook. Together, they reshaped daily life for nearly 1 million people. The numbers capture the shock. 18,000 truck drivers sidelined. Transport costs up 20%. Inflation at 10.2%. A workforce reduced by 23,000 in 1 quarter. Unemployment above 21%. Between 100,000 and 150,000 residents gone since 2022. These are not abstract figures. They translate into empty factories, delayed salaries, and families packing quietly at night. Strategically, Kaliningrad still matters. Missiles remain, radar still scans, warships still sail. Yet power projection depends on sustainment. An enclave survives on movement. When movement slows, strength erodes. Economists cited across major outlets describe this as the enclave paradox. The more fortified a region becomes, the more fragile its civilian base grows under isolation. Energy was meant to be the escape hatch. Gas plants, LNG ships, island mode. But independence comes with risk. Frequency instability threatens hospitals and industry. Seaborne fuel costs more. Maritime routes depend on tolerance in a NATO-dominated Baltic. The safety margin is thin. Socially, the impact cuts deeper. The most dynamic residents leave first. Migrant workers follow. What remains is an aging population facing higher prices and fewer options. This is not collapse in flames. It is erosion. Quiet, measurable, relentless. Globally, Kaliningrad signals a shift. Power is no longer measured only in battalions and jets. It is measured in customs rules, rail gauges, grid frequencies, and insurance clauses. Cheap tools now blunt expensive arsenals. Pressure below the threshold reshapes outcomes without triggering war. So the questions sharpen. Can Moscow stabilize an enclave that bleeds people and capital? Can subsidies and sea routes offset hardened borders and shifting standards? Will Kaliningrad adapt into a self-sustaining island or slide further into isolation? And beyond Russia, who is next to face this model of pressure? Which region will discover that logistics, not firepower, decides endurance? Share your thoughts, join the discussion, subscribe for more in-depth geopolitical analysis.